Hello, geniuses. This is Christina Bruhan with Coin Genius, joined today by Mr. Oz Sultan. He is
Hello.
here to be representing the other side of the debate. So we did blockchain for liberals. We are now doing blockchain for conservatives. So this is a no holds barred conversation. We are going into an election year. We are going into the world changing with the COVID landscape.
Mhm.
Oz is a very familiar face to Coin Genius. He participates regularly in Genius Wednesdays, and you can hear what he does on a quantifiable level to move things forward. Oz, I'll turn it over to you. Maybe you can introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your campaign and just kind
Mhm.
of what you do to represent the conservatives and why Coin Genius thought of you immediately if we're going to go into this 4th of July holiday weekend, understanding this landscape of an election year and what blockchain can do for the average person.
Absolutely. First of all, happy birthday, America. I think there's a lot of folks out there that are going to take this as a time to reflect, a time to cherish what they have, and a time to spend time with family. And I think that's amazing. I will say a couple things, just I guess as an introduction. I'm the Republican district leader for the 70th Assembly in Harlem, New York City. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Harlem Republican Club. I'm also a candidate for state senate in the 30th district, running basically in a platform that is distributed ledger technology, community banking, fixing some of the food insecurity issues, and bringing us back to what I would call traditional republicanism. Some of the things that I think we've deviated from over the past couple of years. I think we should be a little bit more states' rights. I think we should be a little bit more community focused, and I think we need to figure out how to fix some of the financial gaps out there, specifically for Americans that are suffering in the time of COVID. I think stimulus checks are a good start. I think that we're going to need a bit more. And I think what you've seen over the course of the past couple of months is a divided nature of Republicans looking at Andrew Yang's UBI proposal and figuring out ways to address that. And I think there's some light I can shed on that as well.
So, Oz, I'm glad that you talked about UBI because we're going to try and take these in segments, especially in a time of sound bites where people need to kind of just hear succinct answers.
Mhm.
There is a lot that we need to unpack in the next 40 minutes or so that includes both blockchain, privacy, data as a whole,
Mhm.
green technology, Wall Street, UBI, the corporate landscape, what will be
Yep.
normal to the next generation. You have a daughter, right? And then
Mhm.
all of the intricacies around why we consider you a Coin Genius oracle and why you are a subject matter expert around the nuances of funding and VCs and tokenomics and like investment in bleeding edge technologies and what it means to disrupt the status quo. So
If
that's
we
a
got,
lot to unpack. But I think what
Mhm.
I learned, lessons learned from last time, I think the first thing to do here is if you could establish the platform of what it means to be a conservative, what it means to hold those values so that we can at least have some kind of rallying point and viewpoint about how we attack, through the lens of how we attack each one of those topics.
Okay. I think what we're talking largely here is domestic policy, so I'm going to keep it relatively specific to that. Foreign policy, I could talk to you ad nauseum, and I'm sure that would probably bore people to death. In terms of domestic policy, what I'm going to tell you is that there's a dissonance in between where Trump is and some of the standard Republican views. But I'm going to start where Trump is, and then I'm going to get back to where I am in terms of a reform Republican and talk about some of the Republican insights as well. From the Trump perspective, it's focusing on funding for opportunity zones, which is deploying in 2021. And that's basically a lot of your urban areas across America, starting with 10 major cities, including the entire island of Puerto Rico, that are going to start getting large grant subsidies from the United States government, as well as funding for historically Black colleges and universities. One thing, just from a foreign policy perspective, I will bake into this is that the president signed the Uyghur Act, which basically puts China on notice, saying, hey, you can't commit genocide against millions of Muslims, and I think this is a good thing. I also think it starts setting the stage for stronger foreign policy that can affect domestic policy in terms of manufacturing and job development. Changing NAFTA up and working with the Democrats is also something that's sort of cornerstone. Right now, there's actually work that was done with Democrats and unions to say, hey, we've got to keep these jobs here. We've got to build, because it's no more taking the jobs, exporting them to Mexico or other Latin American countries where, you know, they're paid somewhere below $11
Or
typically per hour.
Malaysia or many other regions for sure, right?
Well, no, no, just talking specifically about the NAFTA changes, right?
Oh, got it. Right.
Just
You're
specifically
keeping it
about the NAFTA changes.
within the
Yeah,
swim lanes here.
yeah, and then the last thing is the H-1B changes. So, you know, half of the jobs that could be going to Americans are going to H-1Bs through recruiters in Silicon Valley and a variety of other major cities across America. And there's been a stop put to that as well. So what that means is
Hey, I
qualified.
need them. I need them in the tech world. Are you telling me that I can't get H-1 visas for my tech resources?
You're going to have to hire Americans who are equally commensurately qualified, and there's tons of them.
Good to
The
know. See, my head is down building Coin Genius things, so sometimes I miss these like legislative things, and I'm like, oh, that happened. Okay, good to
Yep.
know. All right, so Oz,
So
let's practice.
just to recap that that's more, you know, Trump republicanism. I'm reform
Let's
republicanism.
talk about conservatives as a whole. I think that
Well, no,
becomes
no, no, I just want to add 2
overarching
points. So
umbrella.
reform republicanism is we also need to fight for food insecurity issues and solve those, and we need to solve the issues of access to jobs and job training. And that's also coming from some of the existing policies, because you've seen changes in terms of the hiring process, looking more at skills than actual bachelor degrees for many jobs that are available in federal government. And I think what you're going to see is trade skill education coming from the Opportunity Zone and the HBCU educational perspective into 21. This is where we stand as a party largely, and I think a lot of people misunderstand that. In terms of the remainder issues, look, most Republicans are more, I would say, social issue conservative. I am more social issue middle of the road, because I live in an area where we have to look at both sides of the aisle, and we have to look at the flexibility and the nature and the need of the constituents that are out there. You know, and I think that's the kind of it encapsulated in a nutshell. The party is looking to change, and it is growing. But the party is also looking at the inclusion of leadership of more minorities, and that's, you know, something that inside of New York. I'll just give you an example. I am a state delegate to the convention. I am a state committee person, and I vote on issues. And I think that's fantastic, because if you really think about how many people who look like me have had the opportunity in politics to go up to that level inside of whatever party you're in, I think it's pretty awesome, you know.
I would agree. You know, I'm a big supporter of the holistic view that you have among a lot of different issues, especially with blockchain and really getting the narrative out. There's a few folks that are in the blockchain community that are kind of running for office. I think of you, I think of David Gokhshtein, I think of other folks that are kind of trying to bring this a bit more public. Coin Genius is trying to bring this a bit more public. But really the reason we wanted to come together today is to be able to articulate the powers of blockchain in a way that's digestible to our target audience. And we had one segment that was blockchain for liberals, and we talked around a lot of things, especially around transparency and being able to kind of cut the fat. And I know that you and I have spoken a lot about that. What can you talk about in blockchain and conservative initiatives? I know that you work in PPE. I know that there's a lot of things that we could kind of touch on, but it's really important because I have about 8 layers that I want to dig through. So it's really important that we kind of like touch on it, give me kind of your stamp of approval, and then I want to just blast you with a whole bunch of other questions if you're
Sure.
okay.
Let's start with PPE. So I am a advisor to the Radiologics blockchain, which is something we're trying to roll out into you know, a number of large manufacturers to let them know, yes, the product that you're actually trying to get is real, it's authentic, it's verified, and even if it's sold by a broker, that broker has, you know, some sort of diligence done on them inside of the chain by which you're buying it through. Because one of the biggest things that we've seen, and I'm sure you're going to get a movie about this a couple years from now, it's almost like War Dogs. You have got a tremendous amount of fraud out there. We have got a tremendous amount of fake brokers. And at the same point in time, there's fake lots. The state of Texas ended up spending $800 million on fake 3M product. The state of Florida spent $600 million and it was a ghost lot, meaning they spent $600 million and they got no masks. So there's a need for transparency and specificity, and we think Radiologics. There's also VeChain. There's also a number of other ones out there, but I'd much rather us go with something that was domestically produced, in terms of looking at it from the perspective of where blockchain can actually legitimize, verify, and solidify who's selling, who's buying, who's transacting.
Right.
From a
Let's keep that rather agnostic. Let's go a little higher level because not everyone lives in your brain. I'm learning that not everyone lives in my brain, and we have to like take
That's
it
fair.
about 17 notches for the average person to understand that Radiologics and VeChain are like ownership, like stamp of approvals. You guys can think about it like a
Well, not just ownership stamp of
tracker.
approval. They
So
authenticate.
there's,
They authenticate.
I don't, we don't, I know
definitive.
you want, okay. If you can give a 30-second overview.
Yeah, totally. They authenticate they validate the product was produced by whom. They validate the product is being sold by whom. They authenticate who can sell that product. They authenticate who it was sold to, and they authenticate the price transparency. And so what's beautiful about this is the Department of Justice is going after people for price gouging. This is a solution that start to finish traces all aspects of that.
And I know that you always look at it from the government standpoint. I tend to look at it from the Fortune 500 standpoint of that could do a lot for traceability for agnostic. It's very agnostic to if you have trouble between your finance department and your tech department and your procurement department. And if you're like, hey, it takes 4 months for us to figure out what's really going on, you could use blockchain. That's where it's really applicable.
Blockchain and digital ledger technologies will basically allow all of these different groups that never talk to each other or have software systems in their companies that don't allow them to talk to each other or antiquated, like many companies are operating stuff that was built in the 80s, and New Jersey is apparently operating a payroll system for certain things that was built in the 60s, right?
What's the name of that one again? Tell me again.
The one in New Jersey, they were looking for Fortran programmers.
Fortran, there you go. You might as well be like, okay, so we need it back on tape again. Like we're gonna need to go all the way back to tape at this point. All right, so I grew up with like DASD and those kind of things. So those are like haha funny jokes in my world. Maybe everyone else like, what the hell is she talking about? Yep. Let's talk a little bit about blockchain and privacy. I'm a big fan of what Brittany Kaiser does and the Own Your Data
Huge fan of Brittany.
Everything that's going on with like this new evolution. What I really want people to understand from the Coin Genius content is what the world could look like in 10 years. We see it. We know Pandora's box is open. What does that look like to you and for conservatives? And why is that so lucrative? Why is it such a big, you and I talk about this all the time. I know you have so much to say on why there's so much money to be made around these new technologies, around green technology, around just everything that blockchain brings to the table. I feel like you're the right representative to be like, there's so many opportunities here.
I'll put it to you this way, and this kind of echoes a lot of the stuff that Brittany talks about. From the Republican side of the house, Tom Cotton was the first to embrace and say, hey, give people $1,000. Let's start some sort of a UBI initiative. We don't have people working. We actually have them quarantining. My perspective, and I call it the Harlem conservative proposal, and we're in the process of writing this up and basically getting enough signatures to take it to the RNC, is pretty simple. You have data that you create everywhere. For example, Facebook makes roughly about $40 per user in terms of the data that you create on an annualized basis. Why is Facebook not sharing that with you? So our perspective is relatively simple. The government blockchains are going to start deploying in 2021, and that's coming from the executive down in terms of tracking spending and where things go and how allocations are made. But I think what we need to be looking at is we need to be looking at blockchain products and blockchain projects that can actually help you to securitize yourself. For example, if you are sharing data with applications, there should be a methodology by which you can use blockchain to authorize that data. And the view that I have is very simple. there's multiple digital ledger technologies out there by which you could store and save your browser data. For example, the Brave browser right now pays you
Brave
to
is
actually.
one. So let me help
But hold
baseline
on, let me
here.
let me
So
just finish, let me articulate this whole thing real quick.
I was going to
Um,
help the audience, but sure. We're
yeah,
going to assume the audience knows
Brave
everything.
is a browser built off of Chromium, which is the Chrome product, but it's a hell of a lot simpler to use, and it pays you. It puts it you're paid a couple bucks a month just to surf on there in Brave tokens, so that you can actually convert and spend inside of inside of different crypto paradigms. But the way that we should really be looking at this as Americans and as our own data privacy, and and by the way, there's a couple acts that you should be calling your own Congress people about in order to push against, but we'll get into that later. Your data, from your browsing data to the data that you're providing, that's your personal information, to the data that you are providing to any device that is collecting data off you, say your Amazon Alexa, which by the way records every single conversation in your house, including those of your children, which is why I don't have one, including your Google Home devices, they should be authorized to use that data. And so we're looking at this from two perspectives. One is legislation, okay, and that's going to take some time. It could take years. But the opposite side of this is if we have the paradigm of people utilizing different systems to store their data and to provision access of that data, we've created a UBI paradigm that's self-supported. It's not the government just handing out checks. It's a baseline that allows Americans to level up like in a video game, because that data is yours. That data you can license to different applications if you authorize them, and they should be paying you anywhere from a couple of bucks that you can make in the Brave browser right now to tens, if not hundreds of dollars for more privileged information that they have, period cycles, or sorry, menstrual cycles, diabetes use. I mean, think about all the stuff that's being collected by the devices on you. Your pacemakers have, updated information that's pushed to the cloud. All of this data is collected, but you're not being monetized for it. And so the thought process generally, and this should be falling into legislation in the next 4 years, or 5 years, because this takes a while, is that the Harlem conservative UBI perspective is you should own your data, you should be able to license that data, and you should be compensated for that data. And what that does is that gives you a baseline of cash to operate every month. And then from there, you should be able to level up. You should be able to level up in terms of trade education or training, in terms of different educational opportunities that are out there that are not collegiate, that also allow you to then share data and to level up in terms of what you're earning. So the start of this might be, $300 to $500 a month, but the end of this could be a couple $1,000s a month. And what it does is it allows people to live at the level that they're comfortable being engaged inside of the UBI ecosystem, while at the same point in time, not being an onerous expense to just everyone else. Because there's been a lot of conversations about, forgiving student loan debt. I have a lot of issues with this because I live in Harlem. And Harlem's emblematic of everywhere in America. 2/3 of Americans don't have a college degree. So why should 2/3 of Americans be paying for people who picked some of the wrong degrees, that don't find those degrees utilizable because they were in, some of the soft skills or humanities, or, an English degree,
Right. And
when
I
engineering
see
and
I
computer
see where you're
science are the ones
going.
people are hiring for.
I see where you're going with that. I have to call time on that just because we have to time box some of this. And
Hmm.
I love that you represent some of those underserved communities. I think that that's a very big deal. In the meantime, I need us to talk a little bit, and I'm only going to give you 5 minutes because I know you could talk all day long about this. Before I pull the claws out, which I'm going to because
Hmm.
you know how I feel about things. Before I pull the claws out, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to talk about your involvement with the current administration and what they have done for blockchain and for moving this industry forward, for understanding what a digital dollar is and for understanding how things move the market. I think that you guys, as conservatives, you deserve a little bit of time to talk about what you've done right and why you know that you are the right ones to move into the next ecosystem, because Trump has not done a great job at articulating that. You have a lot of weight on your shoulders here, sir, but I will give
Hmm.
you until 3:45. So you have T minus 5 minutes here to.
That's fine and easy. The president signed several executive orders that funded opportunity zones. Opportunity zones were actually created under Bush. Some work was done under Obama, and things were signed. But the biggest problem that you have with government is stuff's never funded. And so what Trump did was he funded them. Secondarily, there's been legislation passed under the previous administration on HBCUs. It wasn't funded. Trump funded the HBCUs. And thirdly, we've got research coming through the Council Exchange Board of Trade that's in cybersecurity, blockchain, and a few other pieces of technology out there. So what that's going to lead to is that's going to lead to a lot of momentum coming initially from Norfolk State University and some of the other HBCUs out there. But secondarily, what we're going to get from this is an echo boom once we see the implementation of national blockchains, which are going to come from OMB, which is the Office of Management and Budget, that controls all of the budgets of every single agency and department in the federal government, as well as the USDT. What's the USDT? So we've got the digital dollar coming. And there's been a number of executive orders and political legislation that was passed that has led to more control over the Fed being moved into the executive, which allows for the creation of one, digital dollars, two, potentially moving us back to a gold-backed standard. And what that would do is that would increase the stability of the dollar, or at least the digital dollar, versus international currencies in terms of trade fluctuations that we're dealing with. But what it also does, and this is interesting, if you look at the economy and how the economy typically works, it is the central banks and it is banks that are kind of driving the industry. If we move to a digital dollar and we move away from the Fed and we move a little bit away from where we traditionally have operated, which is, again, a lot of Keynesian supply side economics of spending right now, we're actually in a new model, which is a creation model. And that creation model also allows for the utilization of new and variegated lending opportunities. Because right now, I mean, look, community banks died in 1992. That's something we're trying to bring back here. If you want to go and get, I'll just end cap with this.
Let's assume that the audience knows peer-to-peer banking means that you don't have to have a bank in the middle of it. Let's assume that we can fast forward that conversation, because I know that you have a lot to say about Trump and balancing the economy and really like this dumpster fire that's been laid at his doorstep, and how you feel like he handled it.
I mean, I'll put it to you this way. You know, the expenditures are up, but there's a lot of stuff that had to be changed. We started to pull back on international expenditures for war. We're diversifying to partner with 55 majority Muslim countries in counterterrorism through Saudi Arabia, and they're shouldering the burden of a lot of that expenditure. And now it's coming to domestic policy. I think if he is successful in winning his second term, there's infrastructure issues that have to be tackled next. I mean, we've got crumbling infrastructure. We had this in the last administration and discussed it, but the dollars have to be spent. We're going to have ongoing COVID support for 24 months, because if you look at the data and you look at what people are postulating, and they're talking about this going in a second wave and a third wave, we're not even in the second wave yet. And what we keep seeing is, I don't really care what the news media says. Whether it was a protest, whether it was a rally, whatever you went to, you do have an opportunity of exposure. And there is a necessity for us to take reasonable precautions. And we're going to see an echo boom from what has transpired in the last couple of weeks, but that's still the first phase. So, all of this stuff needs to be handled, and it needs policy, and it needs spending. And yes, that's where I think he can excel.
So I would like to see more of a narrative of testing and data and science behind the administration. But I understand your points, and I understand your bias. We're going to.
Oh, no, it's not bias. I've spent 3 years learning about bureaucracy. No, I'm just telling you, I spent 3 years learning about bureaucracy.
I know.
For them to actually get testing kits, this is ridiculous.
Everything else that you've ever talked about, I know we're going to do that too. But we're going to take a small little segment right now. We're just going to spend a minute or two around blockchain and Wall Street and blockchain and like VC investment mechanisms, because that's the biggest thing that we've identified with Genius Wednesdays, is
Mhm.
that majority of these alt tokens that are successful are some level of a fundraising mechanism. And if the use case extends beyond that into
It
something
does.
bigger, then that is a stronger use case and that is quantifiable, right? So
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit around I'm aware that the world is on fire. We'll talk about that later. I have my own opinions, and you know how I feel about things, and yet there are many things that I got to go. A lot went right, and printing $7 trillion might look like the world's biggest airdrop. But when you factor it into crypto and tokenomics, it's not that big outside of the
Yeah.
wheelhouse that we're used to and that we can actually create legislation around. And I want to fast forward this conversation all the way to the Caitlin Longs and to, you know, the folks that are doing really big things in this space so that they can understand this microcosm and how it might actually lead the world, and that finance and balanced finance is something that's very important to conservatives.
Sure. So you know, the balancing the budget is something we're gonna have to get to after the pandemic, and that could take a couple of years. So, you know, let's just put a pin in that one right now. And everyone who's talking about that isn't being serious about what's going on around us. You know, but when it comes to the remainder of what are the use cases for blockchain or digital ledger technology, I was just on Blockchain Week Lithuania, and we had one of the guys from the London Stock Exchange on there. And so what they're talking about is utilizing DLTs, you know, blockchain, but DLTs in this case, for increased speed in transactions, increased speed in verification, and 24-hour trading that we're moving into, as well as automated and AI trading that we're moving into, and making sure that the settlements are there, making sure that the systems work. If you look at what IBM is doing, IBM has partnered with Stellar. They're using Stellar, okay, for international remittances settlement. So what this basically means is that every night the European Central Bank, which is basically Germany, lends billions and if not trillions of dollars out to other countries to do short-term settlements. Like, oh, you got to pay your pension, here, borrow this, and they pay it back. And there's fees that they charge. Well, what they've realized is that they can't be so onerous about the fees. And now they're going to start doing the settlements inside of Stellar, which is huge, which is going to drive a tremendous amount of utilization for that token. And it's starting to be rolled out. Beyond that, I spoke in India in 2018. They're looking at digital ledger technology for the bona fiding of property deeds, starting in Telangana, which used to be Andhra Pradesh, which is like, you know, big state. And if you bring that back to the United States, I think there's a lot of ways that we can use digital ledger technology in a very effective manner. And this is one of the things that I'm running on, is like, look, boundaries in between different properties, land boundaries, the sets of taxation. Like our tax rates are going up 2% on all housing across the state, about uniformly. It's between 1.7 and a little higher in New York. But in order for us to actually document everything that's going on and the changes and property assessments and all this stuff that has to be done in reasonable real time, DLTs make most of the sense for that. It also makes better sense in terms of the payments and entitlement systems that we have. Like, one of the things that people could complain about was with the stimulus checks, you know, about $1 billion went to dead people. Well, the systems don't have a real good way of documenting this. And half of these systems, I mean, they look like old terminals that they're typing up and running and pushing all this stuff out on. And these are governmental systems that have been there, you know, for probably decades in many cases, and they haven't been upgraded.
So
I mean,
the way to bubble that up for our audience is, this is another example of how blockchain helps the data come to you rather than you having to spend 4 months to go audit that data and decide if that data is accurate or not. So we're running into a time crunch here, Oz. I want to give you a free form platform because I love you so much. And then I am going to unleash the Kraken and really dig in. And I know that you are not the absolute, like, you know, poster boy of conservatism.
Hmm.
But to me, you are, and I find that your ability to moderate and see the middle is a value that's just ridiculously out of control. Tell me what this industry means to you, and then I'm going to talk to you around some conservative ideals and what this industry means to me from the conservative side of things that need to get better.
I would say this, that, you know, conservatives need to get a little bit more empathetic with some of the situations that are going on, because I think we've got an age gap with many of the conservative leaders out there, and some of the challenges that we're facing inside of our communities, and that's some of the things that I'm trying to get engaged in and change. I will say, for my colleagues across the aisle, they aren't focusing enough on the problems inside of our communities, and are trying to throw a wide net for illegal immigrants and a lot of other folks, when I can't even get basic services for single moms in Harlem. You know, and we've had conversations. We have conversations in homelessness. I sit on the five borough homelessness commission. We've pushed legislation in Albany, and we have our local Democrats, De Blasio, wanting to pay $5,000 a month per bunk in a bunk bed. So that's 10 grand a month for a bunk bed to house basically people who are coming out of prison and homeless people together. But you're putting mothers with children in bunk beds next to people where it might be a risk. And we have all these other issues stemming from that,
What
including
does
rape.
that mean for supply chains? I mean, you are so in the thick of things of blockchain and supply chains, and like empty beds could be treated as a supply chain issue if we have the right data behind it. You know where that's that proponent.
Yeah, I'm on the community board for Mount Sinai. You know, one of the things that we're looking at is, what are the AI and data tools that they're looking at in order that could be brought elsewhere. I mean, a lot of this really becomes that you've got these buckets of information inside of private sector. You've got buckets of information in health sector and buckets of information in public sector, and they don't really talk to each other. One of the big nexuses of opportunities with blockchain is the tech transfer that typically happens from a university perspective. But now what we're talking about is a lot of the federal government organizations, potentially through the Council Exchange Board of Trade, and the hospital organizations, potentially through where we're probably going to go with the revamp of the healthcare legislation, and the federal, or sorry, I call it the corporate institutions that basically play inside of these worlds, right? Because you've got these large corporations that have massive amounts and treasure troves of data as well. I mean, I was at the Council of Foreign Relations a couple of years ago, and you had Amazon, Google, and Facebook up there, and one of them said, in between the three of us, we basically have all the data on everybody out there. You know, this goes down,
Correct,
this
which
goes
is
down to,
terrifying.
yeah,
You would have a real problem with that.
and you think about data collection, it goes back to, like, there was a story about Target a couple of years ago where it started sending maternity stuff to some guy's daughter based upon her purchases, and he's like, my daughter's not pregnant, how dare you send this to me? She was pregnant.
Turns out.
Yeah. So, you know,
Yeah.
we're entering this new arena where your data, your privacy, your sensibility of how you are is something you really need to start thinking about. And I think that's what new conservatism is embracing.
Let's be super real about that, and not to scare anyone, but I was having this conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and I said, listen, every company has siloed data. Every company has their silo of data. Every
Mhm.
human being has their silo of data. You have your own silo of data. And she said, no, I don't. I said, no, honey, you absolutely do. And I'm
Yep.
like, you need to own that data. And not only should you own that data, you should know what's in it. You should be able to monetize on it. And if you want those shoes, you should be able to get those shoes at 80% discount. Like, that's what blockchain can do for you. So we're about to run out of time. So I have to ask you some really important questions. And I really wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about supply chain and like what's happening in the world, but you guys can look at Genius Wednesdays and hear Oz's thoughts on all of this. Oz, I'm going to ask you a super personal question because I would be remiss if I didn't do this, given the topic, given you're a person of color. We've seen riots, we've seen absolute just emotional, visceral reaction. what would you feel like conservatives and blockchain could do for active measures to take around race relations and police brutality and cameras and accountability? And if these guys do things, we want to not see them on the streets anymore. And there's psychological things that go into all of that. I think I've laid the groundwork. I'd love to give you an opportunity to respond.
I'm going to be publishing an article probably Monday. It's a conservative approach to police reform. I've been talking to cops. I've been talking to folks in the military. I've been talking to counterterrorism investigators. I've published in Army journals on counterterrorism before. I think the sensible approach to start with is one that we should have gone to a long period of time ago. One is community policing basically means that the cops in your community live in your community. I will tell you that most of the precincts around here, if you were to meet the cops, they don't know anything about the community. They live pretty far away. One of the biggest charitable organizations that I think does the hardest work in Harlem is Street Corner Resources. And these are the people that show up after your kid has been murdered, okay? Not every place in the country has people like this. And this is not coming from, this is an apolitical statement. That people like that need to be engaged with the police in a manner and fashion so that when something happens, we know where to send them. Mental health services are something else that we need to look at. Bloomberg took apart half of our mental asylums inside of New York City and put people in the street, okay? You've had cascading failures over the course of decades of just bad leadership in many, many cities, and many, many cities that have democratic leadership. And so those folks need to be held accountable for this stuff. But if you really want to fix this, cops live in the communities they police. We need to stop hiring military training from foreign governments. That boot on that knee on the neck takedown maneuver is taught by the IDF, okay? Why are we paying foreign governments to train our cops? We need to come up with better methods. Stop and frisk could easily be assuaged by having the cops in the neighborhood engaged with people. So if you were to go and look at the Secaucus model, which again, they did away with the police, but what they have, and that's not going to work everywhere, okay? I'm just going to tell you that's a very small town that has a different type of civilian policing force now. Some of them are armed. But the focus is that cops and people work together, go to barbecues, do things like that. I have a friend who's a cop in Florida named Jean South. She used to serve on one of the justice task forces, and she's done some real heavy work. And what she does is she goes in, talks to people, hey, how you doing? You know, it's not the same attitude. And I think that's the last piece of it. These are just the starting points, okay? If you were to get into the systemic issues of working with unions, of dealing with data on police that have background issues previously, you also have to look at the fact that this is a high risk job, okay? And a lot of people are like, oh, it's not the highest risk job, look at the number of deaths. No, but it is risky in terms of the sense that the way a social worker comes home debilitated every single day, a cop can come home debilitated every single day. They deserve a little bit of respect inside of this argument, and there has to be a way to bring communities and cops together, the same way that citizens deserve a little bit of respect inside of this argument. But from the perspective of policing on Black lives, all of the ways that they have been educated need to change, because our policing system in this country is one of two. It's number one, where it is protect and enforce, and number two, where we have SWAT teams. They're not educated or trained for anything in the middle, and everything that's happening right now is in the middle.
Right.
And so if we can change the policies, the perspectives, the programs, and the leadership around that, just putting people of color inside of leadership positions doesn't fix the fact that we need to have systemic change inside of the policies of how they engage. But at the same point in time, this defund movement is one of the most toxic and poisonous things I've ever seen.
And
the reason for that is real simple. No, I got to finish this point. I got to finish this point. That money first comes out of community policing, which means all the cops that know people in my community are going to disappear. The second thing that it comes out of is the police athletic leagues, which means all of the police programs that are there for kids so that they don't join gangs and do things for recidivism are just going to be cut. And then
So
the third thing is that anything that is not enforcement starts to get cut. So when we're talking about rape kit testing, when we're talking about
correct.
anti-human trafficking enforcement, when we're talking about crime units, I mean, they pulled the crime units, and I agree, the crime units have some
Hey,
issues with them,
Oz,
but 85 murders in a week, you know?
I hear you, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. The defund the police movement is going to hit the communities the hardest. It's going to hit
Mhm.
all the ancillary programs. Think about when a school loses its funding, they lose their music, their arts, their
Correct.
after school programs. It hits the exact same way. So when you tighten the noose on the money, what you're really asking for in defund the police is you're saying, let's make it transparent. Let's understand where our money goes. I will be, hold on one second. You had a long time to
I
speak.
understand
Hold
that, but that's not the policy
on.
that's being put in
Hold on,
place.
hold on, hold on. I am just going to say on behalf of all of America, I'm really frustrated with like speed traps being like a source of income for the police. I feel like they're preying on the community members of the police to fund the police. I think that needs a complete overhaul with blockchain and transparency, and understand where state money goes and where federal money goes and where community money goes. You do a lot with the police in Harlem to do like community outreach. I think that is
Mhm.
also worthy. I think that the time and money that they spend needs to be quantified. And what you talked about is the psychological impact of what it means to be a police officer and what it means to
Mhm.
take that home and what it means to raise a family with all of that. And that's not compensated from a dollar spend average that we have in our communities right now. But all of those being said, I think that blockchain can solve a lot of that. So, Oz, we have to wrap up here, but I want to give you an opportunity. So, we're going into an election year, we're going into November. You
Mhm.
know the writing on the wall. You guys can look at Genius Wednesdays to see what dire straits our supply chains are in, what dire
Yeah.
straits everything is in right now. The correction that it took $7 trillion to fix in March is not over. There's going to be another
Mhm.
wave and another wave and another wave. What does it mean to conservatives who want to protect their wealth managers, folks on Wall Street, people who are looking to vote in this election, no matter what state you're in? What does
Mhm.
it mean to be a conservative right now with blockchain and understanding where the momentum of this party is going? What can you say about that in like 2 minutes?
The momentum of the party is shifting. We understand that there's a diverse change in the population base. I mean, folks like this, hello, right here, will be the leadership of the future. In doing so, what we need to do is we need to address issues of Black and Brown people. And that kind of engagement is going to start, and it has been starting. The Frederick Douglass Foundation has leadership at the RNC right now, in addition to which we're pushing local proposals in terms of what we can do to get police reform and effective reform in place. But I think what it's going to come down to is the long-term perspectives. We are looking at a protection of your ability to have faith. I mean, I'm an American Muslim. I would like to have my faith. I've done interfaith with a lot of Catholics, a lot of Christians. They'd like to have their faith. My Jewish friends would like to have their faith. And just having an equality in between that and secular folks. I think the second is a focus on community. We need to keep our communities protected. The policing aspect of that is one, but it's really they need to be funded. And I think the opportunity zones are going to come in, and they're going to give us a lot more in terms of many, many cities across the land. Um, the third portion of this is job training and job education. We don't have enough of it. There's a glass ceiling in most minority and poor white neighborhoods across the country. And if you look at a rural white community and a urban Black or brown community, the problems are identical in terms of food insecurity, job insecurity, inability to access education and whatnot.
Real
These are
life skills, things that
life
are
skills.
transferable, things. And the thing is, like, at this point, you have a device in your hand. Sorry, that's a phone for those
Mhm.
of you that can't see. You have a device in your hand that is more powerful than what put rockets on the moon. If you believe that they put rockets on the moon, some people think that the earth is flat. So I can't speak to everybody out there. But my point is, like, you have a device that is so powerful that you have the world's information at your fingertips, and we use it to watch kitten videos. And not everyone needs to be a rocket scientist. I'm
Mhm.
just saying that with Google and with Coin Genius, you could be a genius. And I think that there's a lot of things that go into that ecosystem that Oz is very well versed in, and that is why he is a Genius Network Oracle.
Thank
Oz,
you.
we have to sign off for today. What would you like to say in your final thoughts to the community here?
Take a look at me at oz4ny.com. That's ozforny.com. Look at the platform. Look at what we're trying to do. Look at what we're trying to achieve as reform conservatives. And understand that, you know, the future has to be a balance in between the right and the left of people working together to basically focus on how do we fix things for our citizens. Because right now we've got a stalemate. And if you don't listen to both parties, if we're not listening to citizens and cops and working directly together, what we're going to do is we're going to create systems that don't work. And that's not going to benefit anybody. We need people to be safe. At the same time, we need people's rights to be protected. We need the rights of people in general to never have to deal with a George Floyd situation. And we need to move more towards harmony in between just Americans of all persuasions, perspectives, colors, races, religions, and creeds. And going into Independence Day, I'd like people to just take that message away. We need to just think about how we are more alike than we are different and figure out a way to work together, because that's the only way forward. We've got to build. After this, after George Floyd, after the BLM, you know, presentation en masse to the American public of what is wrong, we need to work together to fix this. So if you are, regardless of what you are, black, white, brown, something else,
Purple.
try and reach out with a little bit of empathy and treat people who are unlike you, at least from a race perspective, with the same degree of kindness that you treat people of your own race. And that's a start point. And that goes the same way for political perspectives, religious perspectives, LGBTQ perspectives, and whatnot. Let's just try and be a little bit more American. And then I think maybe we can work some of this out.
Thank you so much, Oz. I think the overarching piece that you're saying is there's a lot of data silos that need to kind of come together, and that there is more alikeness than there is difference. And to take a rule out of my sister's book, we should all try to have a little grace and dignity right now, and a little less Karens going on in the world.
Exactly.
So, all right. So that's it for Blockchain Versus and Blockchain for Conservatives. If you guys have opinions, we can't wait to hear about it. Please send to info@coingenius.ai. And you guys know how to reach out to Oz. And if you want to get in contact with Oz directly for other initiatives, please reach out to us through the Genius Network and we will help you out. Until then, Oz, as always, you are awesome. Thank you so much. And I love you to death. And please have a safe holiday. And I think about you all the time on the New York side of things.
Thank you. Likewise.
It just it worries me. So I'm glad that you're good, and that things are good and you're well stocked, and that nothing's on fire at the moment.
Listen, God bless. Everyone have a wonderful Independence Day. Christina, I hope that yours is safe and blessed, and that your building allows you to use your hot tub, because that thing is quite nice.
We're open again. It's amazing. You got to come back to LA. Like, oh my God. Like, I'm super excited.
That is like the most relaxing hot tub I've been in.
Amazing.
Like,
Best part. It's the best part of rent. Best part of the monthly rent I pay. Awesome.
All right. Listen, take care. God bless. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful Independence Day. And, you know, just think about what we have and how much we have to give back to each other, because I think that's what we need to start doing this year. We need to start being more together, because that's what this is. This is a melting pot, you know, of every single person from every single place. And that's what gives us a little bit of an edge. And maybe we should leverage that.
I love it. All right. Thank you, Oz Sultan. We will talk with you soon, sir.
All right. Bye-bye.
Best.